Lobby Days, the first and only platform that automates the setup and administration of your lobby day at the Capitol, so you can focus on what matters during session. Learn more at lobbydaysmedia.com or stop by our booth at TribFest.
Okay, hello everyone. Can y'all hear me? We good? Okay. Welcome to the Priced Out panel at the Texas Tribune Festival. We've got a discussion coming about why it's so expensive to live in Texas cities and what can be done about it. This panel is supported by Lobby Days. We appreciate their support in underwriting the panel, but we want to remind everyone that panel sponsors play no role in determining, who's on the stage or the questions that are asked. My name is Matthew Watkins. I'm an editor at the Texas Tribune. I'll be moderating the event today. I'll introduce you to the people on the stage in just 1 minute, but just first a kind of an explanation of what to expect here. You guys have probably already been to panels over the last 2 days, so please silence your phones. If you're tweeting, please consider using the hashtag TribFest18. We're going to talk for about an hour. It's my understanding that we don't have a microphone in the room for audience Q&A. But if people are really looking to ask a question, I think I can call on you and I'll repeat the question so everyone can hear it, just for that expectation. When we get to that point, I'll ask for people to raise their hand and we'll make that work. Now let me turn to our participants here. To my immediate left is Commissioner Rodney Ellis, who has served as the Harris County Commissioner since Harris County Commissioner since 2017. Prior to that, he represented Texas Senate District 13 from 1990 to 2017, where he worked on economic development, education, and budget policy. He's also served 3 terms on the Houston City Council and as Chief of Staff to U.S. Rep. Mickey Leland. Next to him is Gerald Cichon, who has led the El Paso Housing Authority since 2008. He previously served as chief counsel for the Western District of Texas with the Combined Law Enforcement Associations of Texas and was a former senior felony prosecutor for the El Paso District Attorney's Office. Next down the line is Sarah Eckhardt, who has served as Travis County Judge since 2015. Prior to that, she was a member of the Commissioner's Court since 2016 and has spent 8 years working as an assistant attorney for the county. Eckhardt also serves on the Transportation Policy Board for the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization and on the Texas Conference of Urban Counties Policy Committee. And then we have U.S. Representative Bernice Johnson of Dallas, who has represented the Texas's 30th Congressional District since 1993. She's currently a ranking member of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology and a senior member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committees. Johnson previously served as a regional director of the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare under President Jimmy Carter and is a member of the Texas House and Senate. And last but not least, we have Ray Saldaña, who has represented District 4 on the San Antonio City Council since 2011. He currently serves as vice chairman of the Alamo Area Metropolitan Planning Organization and is chief engagement officer for KIPP San Antonio. So the purpose of this panel, again, is housing affordability. I kind of want to start by just throwing some stats out, just a few, about kind of what the situation is in this state. I think Texas has long been considered a pretty affordable place to live. You get people who would move here from the East Coast, West Coast, and get excited about the housing costs or the rent. But that's kind of started to change. From 2011 to 2016, the average rent nationwide grew 11%. In Texas, it grew 50% faster, 17%. Generally, experts say you should plan to want to spend no more than 30% of your income on housing. But 1/4 of homeowners in Texas are considered cost burdened. They're spending more than that amount. And 44% of renters are cost burdened. And the poorest residents, unsurprisingly, might be suffering the most. 15 years ago in Austin, where we are here, 69% of very low-income people were above that 30% threshold. These days, it's 91%. And so I just mentioned Austin, so Judge Eckhardt, I'll ask you first. What's happening here? How is this rising cost of housing affecting the communities that the people up here represent?
The rising cost of housing, essentially people are being priced out of the city limits of Austin. So folks are driving until they qualify, for rental leases, or driving until they can afford or qualify for a loan for housing. More often than not, that's outside the city limits of Austin and in the unincorporated areas of Travis County. So one thing I did want to say, the implication in the title of this panel is that this is an urban problem. I would assert that it's not. We have an affordability issue whether you are in the urban core or whether you are in the suburbs or even if you're in the rural areas. In the rural areas, it may not cost as much, but it's very service poor. It's service poor in transit, it's service poor in education, it's service poor in healthcare. And so people are gravitating toward these urbanized areas where there are good quality services that truly do level the playing field of opportunity, but that housing piece is really preventing the folks who are trying to access those great levelers. Transportation, education, job opportunities. So I don't think that this is just an urban problem.
Congresswoman, you've talked about how this is kind of changing the face of the city of Dallas, where the types of people who are able to live in the city are changing because of various costs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I really hadn't noticed it too much until one day I was sitting at my desk about 12 years ago and saw where Dallas was one of the 10 cities with the most hungry children. And it shocked me. So I went to start to look at where we were. And that's when I realized that the rising number of people in poverty, while we have an extreme rising population of high income, but the divisions in the living is very, very obvious. And we do good planning and make sure that everyone is included, I don't know if we have an answer. Because we have nonprofits who are doing all these fill-in housing and more poverty-ridden people come into them. So we have a rich and poor city, which is not good for any city. So it's very that not just Dallas, but Dallas is a very close one to me. We've got to look at distribution of talent, distribution of education, distribution of transportation, and affordable housing. Affordable housing influences the rest of it. My focus at the time was making sure that we had multimodal, uninterrupted transportation around the North Texas area. Well, we've just about accomplished that, but it has not changed too much about the housing patterns. We still have the better jobs being built outside Dallas, and it's called Dallas, but it's not Dallas. They're building in Plano. First it was east, we put the dart line up, and then now it's west. And the people who are working in the menial type jobs or the non-professional jobs having a difficult time getting up there because they can't live there. And so if all the poor people are concentrated together, you will find a deficit of educated and prepared people even to be in leadership positions. So I think every city needs to take a good look at good planning to make sure we have a good mixture.
Councilman, in your hometown, I read in your hometown paper, San Antonio is adding 15,000 jobs per year, but only 6,500 new housing units per year. Is part of this kind of we're a victim of our own success in Texas?
You know, you mentioned my household paper, which is here, and I can't be as candid as I want to be, unfortunately. But look, when I'm outside of the city of San Antonio, typically I'm the biggest cheerleader and booster for our city, and there's a lot of great things to talk about. But when it comes to this issue of housing and affordability, I have to be as sober-looking as possible to the issue, and it is a crisis that is looming. And I consider this, when we think about Texas and how much we've been celebrating and popping the champagne bottle for all the population growth that has come to our major cities, we've tried to be as strategic as policymakers as possible in thinking, okay, if our city is growing faster than any other city in the country, or we're in the top 10, what are the issues that are going to be the biggest that we're going to have to struggle with? And I've been on council for the last 7 years, and we talked about issues around water, we talked about issues around transportation, but I think there has to be a little bit of a mea culpa, that shame on us that we didn't recognize that when you have not only rapid population growth, rapid appreciation of real estate, that you're going to start to see a crisis when it comes to affordability. And we've lost some neighborhoods as a result of being slow to the wheel or asleep at the wheel when it comes to that. So San Antonio, just to give you a quick snapshot, this was made most real, and I think every city has an example, whether it's that quickly gentrifying neighborhood or that emotional case where people are being kicked out of places where they've lived for 30, 40 years. 2014 was San Antonio's wake-up call. We make a lot of public investments, but when we create these $300, $400 million investments, we actually expanded the Riverwalk, which is well known in San Antonio, to the north and the south. But what we didn't realize was all of the speculation and property valuation increase along those corridors. And so in many cases, you had these mobile home properties and property owners of that land who said, all of a sudden, this is really valuable, and I'm going to just go ahead and boot out and kick off every person who's living in this property. And all of a sudden, everybody's waking up to this issue of not only the case of public investments leading to this kind of displacement, but how have we taken a strong analysis of all of the areas that are on that cusp in the city of San Antonio? So 2014 was our wake-up call, but it's been happening before that. And we're finally now starting to get smarter, where we could have really just picked up a paper and seen what's happened on either one of the coasts, whether you're talking about Seattle or San Francisco or New York or Washington, and realized that this was coming. So San Antonio put together a huge task force that took about a year to analyze the issue, came down with really two assumptions, that like most things, it's going to come down to whether we're willing to invest the money and whether we're willing to talk about policies at the state level that allow us to actually mitigate some of the costs of these fast-growing neighborhoods. So we're in that process now and just passed a budget that included, for the first time, general fund dollars to support affordable housing. And I think that's what you're going to see a lot of cities across the state of Texas have to do. Not without opposition, because folks will say, hey, look, fix my potholes, fix my parks, pay the police. When it comes to housing, folks are not, we have no muscle memory when it comes to the issue, and that's why I think we're a little slow behind the curve.
Commissioner, you've been in state government and various aspects of government for a long time. Do you agree? Is this something that's a lot of people across the state are just now kind of waking up to? Are you hearing about this issue more than you did, in the years past?
I don't think affordable housing historically over my years in politics was a major priority in government in Texas. In my town in Houston, for a long time, when the getting was good from the federal government, Congresswoman, the city just didn't take it because they didn't want the strings that were attached to it. I remember when I was on city council and I read about someone on the Austin City Council named Sally Shipman, who was trying to get the city of Austin to use its money instead of money to do affordable housing. And I thought it passed. So my last year on city council, it's crazy language, but I was trying to get something called socially responsible capital improvement package, which I remember. Social, we're trying to divest from South Africa, and the phrase was socially responsible. But we passed it on the ballot. When normally you pass in bridges and libraries and police command stations, which have a lot of support. I didn't know it. Sally Shipman tried it, but it failed when she did it in Austin. So Houston was the first place to use some of its money, local money, for affordable housing. But they didn't really use it the way they should have used it. The developers got in. I had a definition of affordable come to the Senate. So they want to use it too. Here's what I think the big problem is here. This is more from my state perspective. On the local level, we get our money primarily from property taxes. With counties, that's all we get.
Preach.
That's all we get. A city gets a little bit of sales tax. San Antonio came up to get some, get a so they could get pre-K, I believe. So if most of the money that you can get on a local level, you got to take somebody's money. As painful as that is, you're never asking for money. That's a real challenge because you got to raise property taxes in order to do it. But here's a real kicker for you. The state would give local units of government more money, their money, to put into affordable housing if we'd taken $100 billion over the last decade in federal money that went to other states for health care. So that's $100 billion the state would have had, and they could have used it for housing, or they could us use it for housing. As the state has reduced the amount of money it has put into public schools, then the local school districts got to raise it. Where do they get their money from? Property taxes. Now, we'll say this on your initial premise. I've had to rent housing in Austin for years, in New York for 2 children in school, and now in Austin for 1. So just based on my survey, the cost of housing in Austin, as an example, when I was a legislator, I don't think was as expensive as the cost of housing for my daughter who was living in New York. But she wasn't, I was living in downtown Austin. That's like living in Manhattan. You got me? She's living in Harlem. It was about the same, but look where I was living. So I don't know that our housing, if I just happen, you could Google it and find out, is the cost of housing in El Paso, Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, higher than the cost of housing in LA, wherever, Chicago? I don't really think that we're that much higher. But people come in with an expectation that it's lower. What they don't know is what they're going to pay in property taxes. So they go get a house, or you don't get a house where you want to stay. So if you got to move way out to bum hallelujah somewhere, you know, that's a real challenge because we are traditionally a low state, but we also low on delivery of those social services. So in Houston in particular, if you move way out, you're in trouble. We didn't go get the rail money when the getting was good. So that's a challenge. How do you get back in? And then the safety net issues are just not there. So a lot of it, with all due respect, I think goes back to state. Last point. The largest city in Texas, when the census comes out, will no longer, it'll be something called unincorporated Harris County. Now that's the damn wild, wild west. Because counties don't have ordinance-making power. So now I had 750,000 people as a state senator. They have about 1 million, 1 million, 2. The 30% that's unincorporated, when they come to talk to me, what do you do about the noise? Not a damn thing. Counties don't have ordinance. Well, I can't do anything about that. If you wanted a quiet place to live, you should have moved in the city. Take that. Don't. If you went to Houston, maybe don't say that. Maybe you should consider moving in. But you know, so we don't have that regulatory framework. So that's a real challenge. But I just want to stress the number one issue I think for most households is the cost of health care. And the $100 billion we gave away over the last decade. And that could have been used on a host of other issues.
Mr. Cichon, you work for one of the biggest housing authorities in the country. You know, I think when a lot of people kind of think about like what can the government do to provide affordable housing or to make housing affordable, they think about kind of the old school thoughts of, you know, government-funded developments and things like that. You know, there's a lot of challenges with those. A lot of them are old. A lot of them need repairs, and a lot of authorities have trouble finding the money to make those repairs. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in El Paso to address those problems?
Sure. If you think about El Paso, and we always have to try to explain what El Paso is, because there's a misconception of kind of who and what we are, because we're 9 hours away from you by a car. We're the 19th largest city in the United States. If you look at our region, it's over 2.4 million people. You have 30,000 border crossers a day. We are the 14th largest housing authority. You were number 2 for urban poverty behind McAllen, Texas. and we have the lowest crime rate in the United States. We also don't have a housing problem the way you guys have housing problems. And one of the things that we can talk about, other than the benefits of living in El Paso, is El Paso has had a housing authority for 80 years. A lot of you all have had housing authorities for 80 years. When you talk about addressing housing affordability issues, we are the infrastructure for affordable housing in every one of your communities. That's what we are. We right now house 6% of the total population of El Paso, or 40,000 people. And if we turn our resources to bear, if we can get strategic planning together with cities, there is, I think, an unlimited way that we can fix the problem in certain areas, which is affordable housing. Specifically in El Paso is this. You have 1.3 million units in the United States that's considered public housing. You are losing 10,000 a year because they are now becoming unsafe. You are just closing them up, taking that key and putting it in a desk. That's just reality. This is an infrastructure that the taxpayers have paid for. How do you not let that happen, but at the same time not become a burden upon the local governments and on the federal government other than what you already are? And that's what we've been doing. So it's called a RAD transformation, and they offered 60,000 units of this demonstration program back about 6 years ago. We took 10% of the total allocation for the entire United States. And we turned to the private marketplace for public-private partnerships to raise money to invest in these units to fix it. So far, we've raised over $700 million. We will close another $700 million by March of next year. Tax credits, private activity bonds, working with Freddie Mac to create tax-exempt loan vehicles. The deals are so financially complicated. There was an individual there who has 250,000 units just in government housing by the name of Woody Hunt. He said when he did the first purchase with us that he's never seen a transaction this complicated. But the housing authorities are here. We have the land in your urban cores. We have the population with guaranteed subsidies. We can leverage ourselves with private businesses to make opportunity where traditionally you didn't have any. And it's that strategic plan that you all are talking about. You say, hey, listen, where do you want us to build? See, back in the day when you look at El Paso, the old stuff from 1938, you put a park with the city next to a housing authority property next to a school. So that we didn't have to build park space. We had parks right there. The school didn't have to worry about migration because you had the people right there. We had a symbiotic relationship that somehow along the way we've lost. And it's not just El Paso, it's a lot of different places. It's not all places, but it's some places. And the housing authority has to recognize that itself has torn down more units because they've screwed it up than what they've created. Cabrini Green, Igor Pruitt. I can go through hundreds of communities that no longer exist because the housing authorities were a demonstration program as to how they did this. But if you take poor people, like you said, and put poor people next to poor people in a poor district, you've limited those opportunities. You need to figure out how you create mixed income. You need to create how you do mixed use. You need to put them where the infrastructure is being built, like the core of your cities where you have buses and everything else. Because you're right, when you're trying to pay for healthcare, you're trying to pay for a car, you're paying 50% or 60% of your money on an apartment. How do you think you're ever going to get out of poverty? You're never going to get out of poverty. Especially when you're in the middle of New York City and just to live in an apartment outside of a rent-controlled apartment is $3,000 to $4,000 a month. You're talking to a family whose nobody's ever gone to college, and you're like, okay, you've got to go to college and you have to get a job on Wall Street. And then you've got to find a way out. And it's just not realistic. And that's one of the benefits of El Paso and why you have migration of able-bodied families out of housing every 5 years, because it's so affordable. 75% of the able-bodied families that live in the housing authority leave the housing authority every 5 years because a $30,000 a year job in El Paso, you can live anywhere in the city. And it's because we've kept building, we've kept creating opportunity. It's a supply-demand challenge. And we have been able to create enough supply so that the demand hasn't forced up the rents. Because you need to think about affordable housing is not the same thing as housing that's affordable.
Judge Eckhardt, a lot of people on the stage have talked about the importance of where the housing is. Just because it's inexpensive doesn't mean it's affordable because of transportation needs, being close to good jobs, good food, and then also just the aspect of what we talked about here about social mobility, and you want to put people in situations where there's quality schools and opportunities for people to hopefully rise out of poverty. I think maybe you guys would agree that that's easier said than done. And there is a lot of, whether it's regulatory or also just public opposition to the idea of, multifamily developments coming into certain areas, whether there's a stigma attached to affordable developments. How much of a challenge is that? And if it is a challenge, how can cities, counties address that challenge?
Oh, it's super easy. It's really easy, and I don't know why everybody hasn't figured this out. Real estate deals take a really long time. Once you build something, it's bricks and mortar, and it sits there. So it doesn't flex with the times. So, back in the day, Section 8 housing, you mentioned Cabrini Green. Back in the day, we thought, and there was all good reason for this, the government thought that Section 8 housing was going to be the answer. We'd get a huge infusion of federal money, and we would build really, really big affordable housing complexes, and that would solve the problem. But what we found is that it concentrated poverty and exacerbated a loop of a lack of opportunity. Government exists as a disruptor of the pooling of opportunity around those who already have it. Because without government, opportunity doesn't cycle through the whole community. It pools around people who already have it. So it was a well-meaning experiment, Section 8 housing. And it did do a tremendous amount for us after World War II, when we had a lot of folks with an expectation of only living in that housing for 4 or 5 years and then moving on into opportunity after they had pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. But as the decades progressed, it became this vortex of poverty. So every housing authority across the nation, except for those who are way stuck in the past, have augmented their abilities through housing development corporations that are second boards that operate to develop properties and sometimes redevelop their Section 8 properties. So again, real estate deals are super complex, and once you build them, you've built them. They don't move. They don't move to another area as things change. So we have an opportunity here to be much more nimble through public-private partnerships. I think that public-private partnerships are definitely something that we must explore with caution, because they're also massive opportunities for fraud. I don't say that lightly. We must be very vigilant when we're using as Senator Ellis said, when we put local funding into these things, the only tool we have to help also hurts. So if that tool is abused in a bad public-private partnership, then that's a double abuse. So we have to be really careful in these public-private partnerships and really make sure that we have a risk allocation that makes sense so that we can start moving opportunity into areas of opportunity for affordable housing. So in Travis County, one tool that we've used is we took a look at our entire real estate portfolio, because government owns a lot of dirt. And unfortunately, government has no carrying costs for owning a lot of dirt. So we'll let dirt sit there and be underutilized because we don't have to pay property taxes. Private industry will never let a piece of dirt sit because they have to pay property taxes. They'll use the heck out of it. I'm trying to reverse that at the county. We looked at our entire portfolio and said, what real estate do we have right now that would be a high opportunity area on which to build affordable housing co-located with county services. And so we have a long-range plan to build affordable housing on permanently tax-exempt county-owned property in partnership with the private sector that will also build what we need as a county on the same dirt. That way we are owner residents along with the renters. Very unlikely that we're going to have a fraud circumstance if we're the recipients of the bricks and mortar too. The county is the beneficiary of the bricks and mortar also. Very unlikely to see a fraudulent circumstance happen there unless we're just dumber than a box of hair, which happens. We've already started one property at 53rd and Airport Boulevard, which, curiously, when we started the effort, our affordable housing, our internal affordable housing folks said, well, we can't build an affordable housing project at 53rd and Airport Boulevard. That's a low opportunity census tract according to the federal government. How many of y'all live in Austin? How many of y'all know what's at 53rd and Airport Boulevard? Would you consider that a low opportunity census tract? It's on the red line. It's down the street from the new ACC Highland campus. Every, froofy hot restaurant is opening along that stretch. It is not a low opportunity census tract. So we went ahead and plowed ahead with it and entered into a public-private partnership with a private entity that pulled down federal tax credits through the state to build our flagship Health and Human Services office co-located with 146 units of deeply affordable housing that runs from studio all the way up to 3-bedroom at the corner of 53rd and Airport, and we'll be cutting the ribbon on it in 2021. We also have a property in Travis Heights, right behind Vinaigrette. How many of y'all been to Vinaigrette? It's lovely. You should go. Tasty salads. Lots of really prissy people. We're going to have an affordable housing complex right behind Vinaigrette, co-located with our, probably co-located with our deaf services, probably co-located with our drug court, and having an affiliation with Gardner Betts, our juvenile detention facility, because we got a lot of kids who are aging out of foster care who might have had some involvement in the criminal justice system in their past, but they're looking for some affordable housing and a way to transition up and into adulthood. We have another property over on Cesar Chavez in 183 where all of the fancy restaurants are going in, that's currently a warehouse that also will be affordable housing co-located with our transportation and natural resources and also our home rehabilitation and repair services. And we've got properties all over town. Those are just going to be the first 3. And those will be permanently affordable in areas of very high opportunity. And you will not see the kind of fraud that we fear in public-private partnerships because we will be owner residents along with the renters.
Can I just point one point of clarification? So when housing authorities are doing this, we maintain ownership, all right? So you sell the property and the property reverts back to you at year 15. You get all the benefit of that investment without having to pay for it. That's what happens with the tax credits and everything else, how that works, okay? What the housing authority has done with its $1.3 billion has cost 0 taxpayer money. Let me say that again. We've dumped $1.3 billion into fix the public housing in El Paso as 0 taxpayer money. So I think the fraud issue that you're talking about and the tax issue that you have is also taking no money from the city government at all to address, or county government to address any of the gap financing. That's all happening through the housing authority itself. That's why I said if you can get additional partnerships, there's just so much more you can do because we're all kind of working hurdy-gurdy and individually.
Can I rebut on that just a little bit? I'm not suggesting that there's anything hinky in a public-private partnership that doesn't include local money. But I do have concerns that some affordable housing development that has occurred. I've got some awesome affordable housing developers in Travis County who are true believers who do incredible stuff. I have had affordable housing that goes in that's basically land banking. And when they'll buy something that's affordable today at the end of its 30-year time period, because they know once that 30-year time period ends, they can flip it to market. And that's just land banking for future profit. That's not really affordable housing
I don't think
development.
any of us against the partnerships or private people coming in to do affordable housing, but they do it to make a profit. I think a big part of the challenge that I heard both of you alluding to was, there was no focus on housing cost prices in this country until LBJ created that Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then some years later, I think in about 1975, they went from the categorical funding where it was targeted. You're talking about people who are low income, and you would define them as POOR, not P-O-O-R, because now everybody says all housing is affordable. Just like all of us believe we middle class. I never knew when I was poor. I thought we were middle class. And then even now, if somebody asks me to describe, well, how are you now, Rodney? Oh, I'm middle class. Everybody claims they're middle class. You can only do some micro stuff in terms of affordable housing. But on the macro issue, the reason we have a housing crisis anywhere in this country is because we got a poverty crisis. Most people in Texas will not look like this room. They won't be going to Trib Fest. They tripping out, trying to make it every day. They don't have cars. They the people, we don't see them. They get the early bus to come clean our homes. I mean, that's the problem. We got massive poverty in this state. And then I go back to what I was talking about with the state. When the state pulls away from areas it was traditionally responsible for funding, when they let the schools go down, I know that governance issues, we'll focus on that. If you want mayors to take over the school boards because nobody knows, we'll go do that. But when you pull the funding out, in that little neighborhood that I grew up in that high school when I came out in 72 with 3 white students, and now the high school is blacker than it was when I came out in 72, that's a problem. You mentioned the criminal justice system. When every kid in the school has somebody in the criminal justice system right now, you can't focus on how to really put a dent in the housing problem unless, and I'll close with that, you go back to that broader, those socioeconomic issues. And when we pulled away from the categorical funding to this block grant stuff, people on our level have abused that money for all kinds of stuff. I remember when I was on city council, Carl Ritchie, you tell me if I'm lying, you had a guy trying to use some CDBG money, community development, poor people's money, to go build an Astrodome like Dog Pound. Because he had a study. They said the black guy up there, knowing I was going to jump him, and he said a disproportionate percentage of the stray dogs come from low-income black and Hispanic neighborhoods. So Councilman Ellis, you ought to be for this. You know what my question was? If it's a stray dog, how in the hell you know where it comes from? We've gotten away from targeting these stuff. We have created a system of virtually abject poverty with generations of it. And then we expect those people to just wake up one day and get out of it.
Well, and I think there are some issues of which we're going to have to address that we've allowed to dominate without really getting into the explanation and taking the time. We have created barrios and ghettos, and when the people speak up to protect themselves and become anti-gentrification, we really don't understand it other than they're objecting to change. And change is inevitable. Change is hard. But if a city is going to survive, it's got to be planned. And it's got to be planned with all of the people in mind. We've allowed this problem to fester because we pay little wages and we educate barely and we bring in the talent, and the people that are local rarely get a chance to get a piece of local income. And we've got to just face it and address it. It's not going to be just housing. It's education, it's transportation, it's location. Look at the city of Dallas. Some people are saying, oh, Dallas is looking more like New York. Well, nobody can afford it but those who are coming into Dallas with good jobs. We've got to make sure that we address those issues, and we got to do it with an intellectual planning. We got to bring in departments of planning or university planning to look at our geography. How did it arrive where it is? Most of the time, the neighborhoods that are middle income were once all white, then they became all black, now they're becoming all brown. We've got to have a mixture. We're not going to live in a segmented future. It's going to be a mixture. We're too much of an immigrated country and too much of talent being brought from everywhere else to look at neighborhoods and think of black, brown, or whatever. We've got to have a mixture, and we've got to include the people in making that plain and understanding. When you talk about gentrification, to me, that says, are we going to just sit here and not do anything to change it? No educated person wants to come back to a neighborhood that has 300-year-old houses. They want to live in houses that are fairly new, and especially when they've moved from some other state or some other country to come here to take a job. We have let that get too far out of hand. We're at a point where if we don't stop and plan it now, we will not ever catch up.
Now we're really playing music. I want to riff a little bit. I'm privileged to get to sit next to the Congresswoman and the Commissioner who's talking a little bit about history. And I think it's important to recognize something that this is finally striking a nerve, I think, with the right constituency. Because to be very honest, poor people have been challenged with this issue for a long time. This didn't happen because the Texas Tribune Festival said, why are Texas cities so expensive? And our expert from the El Paso Housing Authority can tell you, like San Antonio, he probably has a waiting list. Our waiting list is 50,000 people looking for to get into affordable or subsidized housing. 10 years ago, it was probably still close to 50,000. And so I think what I've realized, and I think many elected officials have realized, is that until it strikes the nerve with the right constituency, do you really start to get momentum for elected officials, for the private sector, to get creative. And if you want to test that theory, just go back to your local municipalities or counties and try to get more money for buses. Poor people ride buses, and so not many people are interested in supporting that kind of investment. But what we've learned over the last year and what we've seen in newspapers is that it's slowly now affecting a middle class constituency. And the middle class is feeling like even they are being pinched by this. So look, I'll take it as an elected official. Even if the poor folks who live in my district can benefit from everybody actually paying attention to the issue of affordability and the housing crisis, we will take that issue. And then we have to start talking about what kind of weapons do we have at our disposal to attack the issue. And that's where I still think Texas is behind the curve. When you think of whether it's rent control that we've mentioned, actually putting dollars in a strategic way in public-private partnerships in areas that are service-rich. I think in the past we just weren't creative and put them in areas where they will take it because nobody will scream and yell about it. But if we try to put them, even today, and as a council member, and I think that Commissioner Ellis knows this when he was a council member, some of the most contentious issues are those zoning issues where somebody wants to find out who's living next door to them. And they will come out, screaming and yelling, rightfully so. But if all of a sudden I tossed out the idea of by right zoning that would allow affordable housing that didn't have to go before the council, that'd be like throwing a grenade in the middle of a neighborhood association and expecting to come out of that alive. But those are policies that difficult to implement, but probably would be helpful in the long-term future to those folks who are feeling the pinch. But those folks who've been feeling the pinch for a long time, I think we've talked about it, that being poor is expensive. And being poor has been expensive for the poor for a long time, whether it's that jobs have been moving further away, transportation systems haven't been adequately funded, and education systems in some of the neighborhoods where you can actually afford a home have been there for a long time. It's just, we're finally striking a nerve in Texas because everybody's recognizing it.
Well, and if I might, people who don't have, will, going back to history for a second, this country, there's been for the property owning class. Initially to vote, you had to be white, male, and own property. And people thought it was okay. They figured, well, when I get some property, I'll get to vote. Now my crowd figured, well, I don't think I'm gonna get white. So we got to get, kind of the women figured, I don't think I'm gonna turn into a male. You got to figure that out. But I remember when Bush came in, and the big issue was a property tax cut. And he had all us whipped up into a frenzy, including the Democrats. Then I told my staff, go pull it, see how many of my folks in my district own property. They didn't own any property. They were renting. And they weren't going to pass it on to them. And some of my colleagues, whose names I won't remember, who were lining up to try to help Governor Bush get it passed, I had to tell a couple of them in South Texas, only people that own property in your district are the ones that live on that little island you live on. Because everybody else, but people who have the housing shortage historically have not been the ones who have voted. And how we get around that, maybe as it's more of a crisis and they vote, then policymakers tend to respond to who vote. Because at the end of the day, hell, we got to be in to do good. I can talk about a lot of good, but I got to be in here to do something about it.
Since we're talking about things that have happened down the street there in the Capitol, let me pose this question to the panel. The Texas legislature, are they helping you guys meet your goals, making it harder to meet their goals, or
Let me answer that last, having been there 26 years.
Well, first of all, I don't believe that the state of Texas actually puts any money to affordable housing. All of it's federal pass-through. So there's that, not a dime. Next, we've got a lot of affordability moving to the unincorporated areas of these major metros because there's no zoning in the unincorporated area. So the dirt's cheaper, and it's cheaper to build there because there's no regulatory regime that costs you anything. So that's also moving the affordability outside of cities, which is a problem because, like I said, those are service-poor areas. The dirt may be cheap, but there's no transit, there's no hospital, there's your emergency services are spread thin. It's not a resource-rich area to move into, even if you can, if that's where you can afford. So they're not helping us out with dollars. They're not helping us out in leveling the playing field so that we can put affordability where there are richer services. And every time we find a cool widget like public-private partnerships and the very complex real estate deals necessary to make those things work, we're getting hammered on that too.
Well, when you look at the state, whatever they call the housing division, much of the policy, developers go in looking for tax credits. And they use the low-income areas, and they get them. And they throw up these apartments, and in 20 years they are slums. And so what do we gain by it? We're just reinventing the problem. We got so saturated in Dallas with it that HUD said that they were not putting any more money where it could go into the southern sector because we are just overloaded with all of these falling down places. But because that's where it's been, it's harder to try to get them put someplace else. That's why I say we got to plan and we got to bite the bullet, because if we don't do it now, it's lost for good.
So there's a lot of things with the state. Right now you have something called tax credits that Congressman had referred to. The tax credits, you are limited to $1.5 million per development. Unfortunately, it's been $1.5 million for the last 10 years that I've been doing this. And so the number of units that you can build is decreasing. The other thing is you're also limited, because you're tapped at $1.5 million, when you're trying to build in downtown Austin at a much higher price point than it would be in El Paso, it makes it unfeasible to do so. And so as you start to look at then 4% bonds, right? So we go ahead and we get 4%, and I'm using, I know, technical terms, but it's money that's out there. We had to get in line at 3 o'clock in the morning to try to put a reservation in through the bond office in Austin, and we were number 5 on January, the first day of work after January 1. The public utilities were all in front of us. They paid the college kids to camp out to be the first in line in order to take those dollars. So you have that as a reality. So then, and your concerns, and this is something that I'm dealing with right now with what I hit with the Obama administration, now the Trump administration. Affirmative furthering fair housing. My units are falling down. Literally, walls falling off of existing units. I have families living in them. And if I don't rebuild it where I have the land, I can't rebuild it because I can't buy the land next to the country club. I can't move the families, and I have to make a call. Do I just close them and lose that key, or do I rebuild them? And the Obama administration said, I'm sorry, you can't have that money because it's a bad census tract. And I'm like, no, 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 these people are living here now. I have to talk to Ms. Martinez and explain to her why she doesn't have heat, or why she doesn't have hot water, or why the asbestos keeps falling every time it rains from the ceiling because I don't have roofs. Because the way I'm structured as a public housing authority, I may have money, but it's not fungible. So I have money to go through and do social services, but I can't fix the roof. They give me money in buckets, but not the buckets that I need the money in. And that's why RAD is transformational, because it now creates a housing authority that has to run as efficiently as a private entity. For example, we are not a, and I tell my staff this when I talk to them, I'm like, we're not a jobs program. I'm here to house poor people. I'm here to help house people in need. Half of you are losing your jobs in the next 36 months. Because I don't need master electricians, master plumbers, or anybody else, because everything's going to be new. And then most likely, I'm going to end up cutting another 25%. In the end, this housing authority, when I got there, had 560 employees. At the end of it, most likely, I will have about 160. And housing more families at the same time. The regulatory burdens that we have to go through is like what they say with Fred Astaire. We have to, being a housing authority, do it backwards and in high heels. Where a private developer doesn't have to pay Davis-Bacon wages. They don't have to, every time you move a sidewalk in downtown El Paso, get 8 letters from Indian tribes to say that they don't want to sue you. When you try to buy a unit, say we wanted to buy units down here and create affordable housing, I would have to pay, even though they're not rent control, and even though the families living there are market rate, I would have to pay them up to $20,000 a family to leave because I'm government moving into the space. That's happening at the federal level, and that's happening at the state level. That's your problems. I mean, your problems are you can do something, and something can happen even though the monies are pass-throughs. It's just you have to work with them in order to get to that level, and as of right now, the developers don't want to play ball in that regard because it's too much money. These tax credits, you get paid at the front end of the development, not the back end. Normally when you do development, right, you get paid along the way. And so you're also incentivized to make them work. You get your money in cash at closing. You get your developer fee in cash at closing. It's big money in this thing. Now you have a housing authority trying to compete with developers that have access to the state guys because they give money and they're lobbyists and everything else, where the housing authorities are limited based upon our population that, like you said, doesn't vote.
Let me just, before we pass it over to the commissioner to close us up on hammering the state, you know, when you talk about buckets, you're absolutely right. There are some buckets for operations, some buckets for construction, and local governments are having to get a little more creative around just, you know what, if the state's not going to fund this, let's create our own bucket and put some of our own dollars, even though they're not as much. And I'll give you one example of this bucket. So we want people to stay in their homes if they've been living in them for 30 or 40 or 50 years. And in one case, I remember a resident called me. He said, look, you got to go out and check in on my neighbor. Every night he's sleeping in his truck, and I'm not sure exactly why. So we go and knock on his door, and he tells us that because he's got a roof on it, he's got a hole in his roof. You know, summers are hot in San Antonio like they are in all parts of Texas. He'd rather sleep in his car with his AC on. And he has no, you know, he's a senior citizen living on a fixed income, has no way of fixing that roof. So we created a bucket now where we're actually putting some of our own city tax dollars into helping people stay in their homes by fixing their roofs or rehabilitating their owner-occupied homes. So we think that's a good idea. And we think keeping people in the home they've been living in the neighborhood they've been living in for as long as they want is also something that is showing a sense of respect and dignity to that person. But here's another good idea that my issue with the state and what happens at the legislature is typically good ideas go there to die. And here's a good idea that I don't know will survive, but one of my colleagues, used to be my colleague at the city council, Representative Diego Bernal, is going to come up with a case up in the new legislature that says, look, we're trying to protect rapidly gentrifying neighborhoods, and so here's the deal. If you have lived in your home for 15 years, it's owner-occupied homestead. If in that 15 years your property valuation is increased by 120%, you'll have your property tax frozen. And there's a lot of details that go into that. I think that's a good idea, and the people whom he's explained that to think it's a good idea because they think they might have a chance to stay in their home that is changing. Like I said, I don't know how good of a chance a good idea has at the legislature in 2019.
Let me throw out a couple of other ideas that we've tried, and I think we should continue to try, is to let, at local option, allow the homestead exemption to be a flat dollar amount rather than a percentage. That way, if you made your homestead exemption $100,000, a person with a $120,000 home, who is more likely to be a low-income person, gets a much bigger bang out of that homestead exemption than if it were a 20% homestead exemption, which is currently the max that a community can have. Another option that we have tried and we should continue to push is that when somebody owes property taxes and they are over 65 or disabled, that they can work out a deal with their taxing entity to roll that to their estate at only 1 or 2 basis points above what the bank would charge them for a loan. Because right now under statute, they can work out a deal with the tax entity, but it's at something like a 14% interest rate, so nobody should ever do it. There are ways that we can do this if the state will work with us. But the state insists that any tax break that we do is not means tested. And that's what's messing us up for affordability. Because if I have to offer the same deal to my wealthiest residents as I do to my poorest residents, I will continue to exacerbate the problem between rich and poor in an urbanized county. Give me the tools, state legislature. Let me recognize that somebody is poor.
I don't badmouth folks at the Peak Dome any more now than I did when I was there. I think that's fair. But it is a complex issue because at the end of the day, more than anything else, what we have in Texas is a no money problem. So although we can complain about how high property taxes are, at the end of the day, if you go take all of the money that we take to run government in Texas, it's all coming from the same place as your money. Whether it's the school board, city council, county, whatever it is, it's all coming from the same place. Just go add up what we take to run this thing called government and compare it to everywhere else in the country. We're going to be pretty far down there.
We are, I think, last I looked, we are like 45th in the nation in combined state and local tax burden for the average taxpayer.
And you get what you pay for. But here's the complicated thing for the state. We have boxed ourselves in. State government is run primarily off of sales taxes. And although, you know, they'd be more than happy to raise that if they could, I'd be one of the folks complaining because I'd say, you know, no matter how poor you are, you still got to have, you know, now on our level, we might want 10 pairs of shoes like we're Melda Marcos and that wear the same damn shoes all the time. But you still got to pay for those things. But we got to antiquate the tax system. Then in the property tax system, look at the nutty stuff we do. You go take a cow, what's it, baling that hay, stick that on the land, and people have been holding the land since slavery and not paying property taxes. And then you put in exemptions for the folks who you know gonna vote. I'm about to hit that age level myself. You got me? But we got to answer. Oh, you do crazy stuff, and now like a green space exemption for a damn private golf course, and you don't pay taxes. It's nuts. And any fool can pass a tax cut. I passed some big ones. And then you can never get rid of them. But we got an antiquated system. Then the other reason why property is so high is because insurance is so high. We don't regulate insurance in Texas. We kiss them when they roll by the door. But so the issues over there in that dome are very complex. So I would say we ought to work with them and try to get them not to just take problems they can't pay for and then go push it somewhere else. So they want to do appraisal caps so they can say they go reduce what they give to the schools, or we did. I was there even if I voted against it. Passed when I was there. Reduce what the state puts into the schools and then complain about the local school districts raising the taxes. Or deregulate college tuition to say so you can have better quality of higher education and then complain when the regents raise the tuition. But it's much more complex, and you got to look at those overall issues.
Okay, well, we have made it to the end of our time here. So I Appreciate everyone on the panel. Sorry we didn't get time to
Great
question,
job.
but thank you very much.
Forgot about
Thanks
questions.
so much for everything you did.
Now take this damn mic off before I get in trouble with a live mic. It's been following me for a while.
Good to join you.